beneath the familiar sands of ancient Egypt, beneath the foundations of temples, pyramids, and causeways we've studied for generations, some researchers believe there may lie the traces of something older, much older. The possibility that Egypt, one of the world's most enduring civilizations, rose atop the remnants of a forgotten city with architectural signatures reminiscent of early Mesopotamia, and even older mythological lineages tied to the beings we call the Anunnaki, has lingered at the edge of archaeological debate for decades. When you look at the deepest layers beneath Saqqara, Abydos, and the Giza Plateau, you find seams of stone and carving styles that do not fit comfortably within Egypt's known timeline or its tools. Good evening, or good night, wherever you are. I'm really glad you're here. If you're listening at a late hour, I hope you're settling in, letting your shoulders ease, and allowing the weight of the day to drift a little further, away with each breath. Thank you for choosing to spend this quiet stretch of time with me. For more than a century, archaeologists have argued over the deepest origins of Egyptian civilization. Mainstream Egyptology points clearly to pre-dynastic cultures like Badari and Naqada, who flourished between 4500 and 3100 BCE, leaving behind pottery, burial sites, and early architectural traces. Yet beneath certain old kingdom structures, researchers have documented basalt pavements cut with methods inconsistent with copper tools, limestone blocks arranged in non-Egyptian bonding patterns, and sediment layers suggesting occupation long before the first pharaoh united the Nile. Some scholars propose early Levantine or Mesopotamian migrants as the explanation. Others imagine a proto-urban culture erased by desertification around 6000 BCE. And a much smaller, more controversial school wonders whether these layers preserve the fading blueprint of an even older world, one whose memory survives only in stories of sky-born architects and beings who descended to build cities, the way the Anunnaki are described in Sumerian myth. We're not here to decide who's right. We're not digging for certainty tonight. Instead, we're exploring the possibility, the space between evidence and imagination, where forgotten histories often wait. What matters is the way human memory stretches across time, how civilizations inherit landscapes already shaped by others, and how myths sometimes echo practical realities long buried beneath new layers of stone. Take a breath with me, just one. Let it settle. Wherever you're listening from, your room, your car, a quiet corner of your home, I hope you're comfortable. Maybe you can loosen your jaw, soften your hands, and let your breathing fall into a slower rhythm. Nothing to solve, nothing to analyze. Just a gentle settling as we walk slowly into this forgotten world beneath Egypt. And before we drift deeper, if you find these long meditative explorations meaningful, a quick like or subscribe genuinely helps others discover them too. Thank you for supporting this quiet space. Picture yourself standing at the Giza Plateau at night, the air cool against your skin, the sand shifting in mild patterns beneath a sky that looks almost identical to the one the first Egyptians would have seen, and perhaps identical to the sky witnessed by whoever lived here before them. Wind brushes past the limestone edges, moving softly through centuries of dust. The stars tilt in slow arcs overhead. Orion, Sirius, the band of the Milky Way, watching as they always have, watching long before Egypt rose and long before the world knew pharaohs, long before Egypt rises in our memory, long before pyramids break the horizon or pharaohs inscribe their names into stone. This land is something entirely different. When the winds sweep across what will one day become the Nile Valley, they carry the scent of freshwater marshes, the warmth of monsoon rains, and the echo of a landscape still alive with rivers and lakes that no longer exist. When the Sahara stands not as desert, but as savanna, her wide plains stretch in muted greens under a gentler sky. You can imagine the ground softened beneath early human footsteps, the air holding the earthy fragrance of wet soil, and stars glimmering above a world unsettled, shifting through climatic rhythms far older than any kingdom. The terrain feels open, vulnerable, waiting for shapes that have not yet been built. Where the dunes now roll in pale silence, a great wetland once spreads out under seasonal rainfall. Walk across this land in your mind, and you would feel the ground spring lightly, water pooling around your ankles after a storm, reeds brushing your legs in mellow patterns. Thousands of years ago, around 9000 BCE, climate pulses fueled by orbital cycles draw moisture deep into North Africa. This is the African humid period, a time when the Sahara breathes with life. Lakes shimmer in scattered basins, some stretching dozens of kilometers across, their surfaces reflecting constellations that ancient peoples already watch with curiosity. When these early groups look upward, the stars offer navigation, memory, and rhythm. Long before temples align with the heavens, pastoralists align their lives with sky patterns that guide migration and survival. Carved into this shifting environment are the first traces of people who roam with herds, move with monsoon winds, and settle near dependable watering holes. When archaeologists sift through these places, Nabta Playa, Birkiseba, Wadi Tushka, they uncover cattle bones arranged in circular patterns, sandstone megaliths set upright with surprising precision, and hearths layered through centuries of occupation. The stones feel warm beneath the sun even now, textured with grains that whisper of ancient rains. Evidence suggests these pastoral communities understand seasonal cycles deeply, reading the land the way later priests will read stars. One interpretation hints at early ceremonial structures aligned to summer solstice, though scholars debate how intentional these alignments are. This might indicate a developing sense of cosmology, or it may simply echo practical knowledge shaped through generations. When the climate shifts again around 6000 BCE, rains begin to weaken and the wetlands retreat, leaving cracked earth where water once glimmered. You can almost picture the sensation, the ground hardening beneath your feet, the air growing hotter, the sense of grass replaced by dust. Families who once thrived along lakes and marshes move toward the Nile, which remains a dependable artery cutting through an increasingly arid world. The river flows with cool steadiness through otherwise harsh terrain, creating a ribbon of green life. Its banks offer fertile silt, shaded groves, and the promise of continuity. When they settle along its edges, they carry memory with them, stories of distant rains, of stone circles rising in solitude, of starlight reflected on lake water. Across this landscape, there are whispers of cultural exchange even before Egypt forms. Some pottery styles found in early Nile sites share subtle similarities with distant communities. Evidence hints at mobility, at people meeting others far from home, exchanging ideas the way they exchange goods. Perhaps a small group migrates from the Levant or the fringes of Mesopotamia during these millennia, drawn by shifting climate or scarcity. The record is fragmentary, but a few artifacts, shaped beads, foreign-style blades, suggest moments of contact. What remains uncertain is whether these interactions shape the world that will become Egypt, or whether they are threads woven loosely across time. Scholars debate this gently, acknowledging both the gaps in evidence and the potential significance of these early movements. Picture the stars above these early settlers. The sky stretches with stark brightness, unmarred by smoke or city light. When the nights deepen, Orion rises with clarity. Sirius glimmers near the horizon, and the Milky Way sweeps across the sky like a river of pale dust. These patterns become familiar companions to people who live entirely within nature's rhythm. Perhaps they see in these constellations hints of stories that will echo later in Egyptian myth, though we cannot be certain. The evidence hints at shared celestial awareness, but how they interpret these lights remains partially lost. Walking through this ancient world in your imagination, you might hear the distant calls of migrating birds, feel the warmth of early morning sun against your face, and sense the slower pace at which time unfolds. Geological processes grind patiently. Lake basins form, fill, evaporate, and collapse into silence. Winds shift dunes one grain at a time. The land evolves with quiet deliberation. Civilizations, when they eventually come, will respond to these forces with architecture, ritual, and narrative. But here, in this moment before Egypt, the land is the storyteller. Take another soft breath here. Let the immensity of time settle around you. Nothing rushes. Nothing demands resolution. The Nile has not yet become a kingdom. It is simply water moving between banks of clay and sand. The people who gather along its edges live without stone monuments or carved kingship, but they shape the foundation, culturally, environmentally, spiritually, on which greater structures will one day rise. Where the Nile bends through the floodplain, long before Egypt becomes a world of kings and hieroglyphs, there are layers in the earth that feel older than the culture we know. When the first archaeologists clear sediment around early Old Kingdom sites, they notice seams of limestone that do not match the construction phases above them. When the wind blows across Saqqara at dawn, the air carries a thin veil of dust that settles gently along these hidden blocks, revealing faint chisel lines, tool marks, and bonding seams that do not resemble the standardized Egyptian masonry used after 3000 BCE. What remains beneath the surface is quiet, but it carries a texture, slightly rougher, slightly different in proportion, that invites questions about who shaped these foundations. Standing at the base of the Saqqara Plateau, you would feel the stone beneath your hand, turning cool in the morning shade, its surface smooth in some areas and unexpectedly grooved in others. Archaeologists using ground-penetrating radar identify geometric anomalies, rectangular voids, linear corridors, and compacted stone floors, lying beneath the earliest Egyptian layers. These features run at angles inconsistent with the step pyramid complex built by Djoser. Some scholars propose that these alignments mirror construction patterns more common in early Mesopotamian urban sites, such as Eridu or early Uruk, where builders favored recessed corners and inward-sloping platforms. The evidence hints at a structural logic older than the dynasties, though its original purpose remains debated. When researchers map these subsurface features, the outlines resemble the ghosts of a forgotten settlement, half preserved, half erased by millennia of silt. At Abydos, the sensation grows stronger. Rising from the desert floor, the early dynastic funerary enclosures sit atop mud brick foundations. Yet beneath some enclosures are layers of stone cut with unexpectedly fine precision. Walking across the powdery sand here, the faint crunch beneath your feet carries the weight of countless years, each grain shaped by wind, heat, and burial. Excavations reveal a basalt pavement measuring nearly 20 meters across, its blocks arranged with tight joints rarely found in the earliest Egyptian architecture. The basalt edges taper in a style reminiscent of Ubaid period flooring, where stones were fitted tightly to reduce shifting during seasonal rains. Scholars debate whether Egyptians inherited an older platform or simply chose basalt for durability. It's possible that early builders encountered a ruin so ancient they no longer recognized its origin and built directly over it. Carved into the bedrock west of Giza, the subsurface network known as the Khufu quarries contains stair-step excavations and cavities with marks inconsistent with copper chisels. If you place your palm against the limestone wall in one of these chambers, you'd feel the subtle ridges of cuts spaced closer than typical Egyptian tool marks. Some geometric grooves follow a pattern similar to those found in early Mesopotamian stone workshops, where artisans used abrasive slurry in narrow channels to shape basalt. This might indicate experimentation by local quarrymen, though scholars disagree because the marks predate the standardized Old Kingdom methods. One interpretation suggests early Nile settlers repurposed abandoned chambers created by an unknown group whose presence left faint signatures but no identifiable artifacts. The silence surrounding these layers becomes part of the story. Archaeologists rely on stratigraphy to read time. The deeper the layer, the older the occupation. Yet at several sites, deep layers contain stonework more refined than the mud brick structures built above them. When the chronology appears inverted like this, scholars must ask whether erosion, flood deposition, or human disturbance reworked the sediments. It's possible that catastrophic Nile floods displaced materials, preserving older floors beneath younger deposits. Or perhaps early Egyptians intentionally reused earlier foundations for stability. Still, a few carved surfaces are so weathered that they appear thousands of years older than the structures resting upon them. The stones hold their secrets with steady patience. Consider the sky above these early builders. When the nights stretch long and cool, Orion rises sharply, casting a pale shimmer across the plateau. The people who lived here before Egypt may have watched the same constellations, though we cannot know the stories they told. Their perception of time might differ from the Egyptians, who later aligned temples toward solstices and star paths. The cosmic scale reminds us that civilizations rise and fade, while the stars continue their unhurried cycles. Standing on the plateau at night, you might feel the sensation that time folds slightly, bringing distant eras closer. Maybe the most intriguing clues come from tiny fragments. Flint blades shaped with Levantine napping techniques. Ceramic shards with mineral compositions not native to the Nile Valley. And mud brick impressions showing weave patterns dissimilar to Egyptian mats. These items appear rarely and unpredictably, leaving researchers uncertain whether they represent traders, migrants, or the residue of a small community that vanished without written trace. The evidence suggests occasional contact with cultures east of the delta, though the scale of that contact remains unknown. As we imagine this earlier world, the sandstone, limestone, and basalt beneath Egypt's monumental sites become more than building material. They become witnesses. They reveal the slow transitions that precede written history. They show how landscapes accumulate memory even when cultures shift, merge, or disappear entirely. When the Nile floods each year, depositing fresh sediment, it buries not only soil, but the stories of those who walked here before. These stories endure as faint impressions in stone, as irregular seams beneath foundations, as hints of a city that might have existed in the long silence before Egypt. The land is layered with time, shaped by water, wind, and human presence. And somewhere in those layers, beneath the familiar architecture of Egypt, lie echoes that suggest an earlier blueprint, one waiting for the next careful excavation to reveal more. When the Nile Valley moves, through its earliest transitions, long before dynasties or carved crowns appear, subtle traces from distant lands begin to drift into its archaeological record. When the desert air cools after sunset, and the smell of damp riverbank clay rises gently, it is easy to imagine small groups traveling along the eastern Mediterranean, carrying ideas, tools, and stories that will eventually mingle with the earliest Nile communities. When archaeologists sift through pre-dynastic layers at sites like Madi, they uncover objects that do not belong to the local material tradition. Stone bowls carved from Mesopotamian diorite, jars with bitumen-coated interiors, and rare cylinder seals appear quietly, like whispers from a culture hundreds of kilometers away. They arrive not in abundance, but in just enough quantity to raise questions about who reached this land and why. Across the Levantine coast, the environment fosters movement. The shoreline hums with maritime activity, the sea carrying the scent of salt and resin, the wind brushing against reed boats that glide southward. Traders follow these waters through narrow inlets and shallow harbors, navigating by the positions of stars bright enough to cast faint reflections on the waves. Orion's belt sits low on the horizon during certain months, guiding travel along coastal routes. The same constellation later etched into Egyptian myth may have served as a celestial marker for travelers long before Egypt's first settlements consolidate. These slow-moving exchanges bring beads, blades, small idols, and perhaps stories, fragments of human connection carried across the sea. At early delta sites, the mixing becomes clearer. The Mahdi culture shows storage pits lined with Levantine-style pottery, darkened with residues from bitumen imported from the Dead Sea. Hold a shard of this pottery in your hand, and you'd notice its texture, slightly denser, fired at a temperature higher than local kilns typically reached. Scholars debate whether the people who brought these objects stayed briefly or settled for generations. One interpretation suggests small communities from the southern Levant migrated inland as rainfall patterns changed, bringing their pastoral traditions with them. Another interpretation proposes that Egyptians simply traded for exotic goods. The evidence hints at both possibilities, but not with enough clarity to close the discussion. Walking up the gentle slope of Tel El Farka, where early multi-layered settlements stand, you might see the ground shimmering faintly as the sun warms clay fragments embedded in the soil. Excavations reveal administrative seals, some carved locally, others carved in a Mesopotamian style with motifs of horned deities, reed bundles, and geometric spirals. The parallel with early Uruk imagery is striking. Yet the context differs enough that scholars remain cautious. It's possible that artisans in Egypt experimented with foreign styles after contact with traders. It's equally possible that a small group of experienced craftspeople migrated here, adapting their art to a new environment. Both interpretations carry weight, and the earth does not rush to clarify which one tells the fuller story. Consider the Nile during this era. The river moves with a steady, low murmur, sending cool air along its banks, the fragrance of silt rising as water retreats after annual floods. Pastoral groups set temporary camps along elevated ridges, their fires flickering gently under skies unmarred by city light. When they look upward, they see constellations from the same vantage as people in the Levant or Mesopotamia. The sky is a common reference point, a quiet map bridging cultures. Over thousands of nights, shared observations accumulate, becoming patterns, then narratives, then symbols that might appear unexpectedly in distant territories. In the archaeological record, some early Nile structures echo Mesopotamian architectural logic. Mud brick walls formed with recessed niches appear sporadically in pre-dynastic Egypt, a style known well from the temples and administrative buildings of early Uruk. The similarity is not perfect, but it is present enough to suggest influence. When builders press their palms into wet clay, forming bricks with distinct ridges, they leave impressions of technique that researchers later compare across regions. These impressions become the fingerprints of cultural exchange. Scholars agree that some degree of interaction occurred, though whether it influenced the mechanisms of Egyptian state formation remains debated. Alongside these physical traces are the absences, gaps in the archaeological layers where we expect more evidence but find only silence. Perhaps goods decayed, or small settlements vanished through erosion, or climate shifts erased the footprints of temporary visitors. The Nile Valley transforms constantly through floods, sediment deposits, and groundwater changes. Many early structures are lost beneath meters of alluvium. The absence of evidence is never simple. It is shaped by geology as much as by human action. Still, the objects that remain suggest contact deep enough to introduce new symbols, tools, and administrative ideas to local groups who were already forming their own cultural identity. The philosophical question arises: how much influence does a brief encounter carry? A trader passing through may leave a single seal that inspires an imitation. A small group settling for a generation may share techniques of stone shaping before moving on. These moments are small on the scale of cosmic time, yet they ripple outward. Civilizations do not emerge in isolation, even when they appear to. When people move, knowledge moves. When knowledge moves, memory expands. And when memory expands, architectural and symbolic traditions begin to shift, sometimes in ways that echo long after the original contact fades. Standing in the present, we observe these traces through scattered artifacts, weathered clay, and the faintest stylistic parallels. Each clue feels like a soft voice rising from the past, offering pieces, but never the entire narrative. The Nile Valley holds these voices gently, preserving them beneath layers of silt until the next excavation reveals another quiet connection to lands farther east. And as we follow these threads deeper into time, the possibility emerges that Egypt's earliest builders did not begin with a blank landscape. They began with hints, influences, and perhaps the remains of settlements older than their own. Elements that would shape the foundations upon which the first great structures later rise. When the Nile Valley begins drawing people inward, long before monuments rise, the river becomes the quiet spine of early life. When the morning light touches the silted banks, the air carries a faint sweetness of damp clay and flowering reeds, the surface of the water moving with a calm rhythm that feels almost deliberate. These earliest communities, Badarian, then Nakatafuri and the Sekku, leave traces as soft as footprints in wet sand. They carve simple bowls from ivory, polish stone tools to fine edges, and bury their dead with offerings that suggest a deepening sense of ritual. Nothing monumental stands yet, no vast enclosure walls or towering courts, but the foundations of thought, structure, and spiritual meaning begin here, across landscapes shaped by water and quiet human instinct. At Merimda, in the delta, excavators uncover layers of mud brick houses, each wall shaped by palms pressed into wet clay, leaving ridged textures that still hold sunlight across their surfaces. The hearths are circular, darkened with soot, the smell of ancient smoke lingering faintly when soil is brushed from their edges. Pottery fragments show familiar local patterns, yet a few pieces bear decorative lines that resemble early Levantine styles. Scholars debate whether these influences emerge through direct contact or through gradual diffusion along trade routes. The evidence hints at exchange, though not enough to define direction. When dating samples from Merimda's deepest layers, radiocarbon measurements settle around 5,300 BCE, placing these settlement phases firmly before dynastic Egypt, yet advanced enough to show organized community life. Farther south in the Badari region, burials reveal a culture attentive to detail and symbolism. Bodies rest wrapped in linen's early predecessor, positioned on their left sides, facing west, the direction of the setting sun. The soil here feels coarser, mixed with desert sand. The burial pits lined with mats woven from grasses that leave faint imprints in the sediment. Grave goods include alabaster vessels, polished stone pallets, and distinctive red-polished pottery burnished to a shine that catches light slowly, creating a muted glimmer. Scholars interpret these items as signs of craft specialization, suggesting that even in this early era, individuals possess unique skills passed down through generations. Some believe the Badarians develop independently from Nile influences farther north, while others note parallels with early Nubian communities. The debate persists, shaped by new discoveries and shifting interpretations. Walking through a reconstructed Badarian hut, you might hear the soft brushing of reed mats beneath your feet, smell the earthy scent of clay drying in warm air, and feel the rough texture of napped flint tools resting on a low platform. These sensory impressions offer glimpses into a world that balances survival with innovation. The people who live here understand the Nile's cycles intimately: flood, retreat, planting, harvest, and they build their lives with this rhythm as their structure. When the stars emerge at night, Orion and Sirius appear above the horizon, marking seasons that shape migration and planting. These constellations later anchor Egyptian cosmology, but their earliest significance may arise from simple observation, a shared human instinct to look upward for guidance. At Naqada, Ai, and the Sanuk sites along Upper Egypt, the archaeological record becomes richer, more complex. Here, pottery grows more elaborate, bearing painted motifs of boats, animals, and abstract symbols that later echo in dynastic art. Stone tools evolve with cleaner edges, crafted from chert and flint sourced over great distances. The Naqada people form settlements dense enough to leave midden layers, accumulations of ash, bone, and pottery that preserve daily life in geological cross-sections. Some structures reveal walls arranged in patterns later associated with administrative compounds. One interpretation suggests increasing social stratification. Another proposes that these patterns occur naturally through expansion. The evidence remains open to both possibilities. Amid these layers, something unexpected appears. Occasional foundation stones cut with a precision exceeding the simplest needs of early settlement. These stones measure roughly 40 to 70 centimeters in length, with edges flattened using pecking techniques not commonly found in surrounding levels. When archaeologists compare them to early Mesopotamian building methods from the Ubaid period, a few similarities emerge: the tapered shaping, the tight-fitting joints. This does not prove contact, but it suggests experimentation with unfamiliar techniques. The origins of these methods remain uncertain, yet their presence hints at a growing architectural intelligence that anticipates the monumental phases to come. Consider the philosophical dimension here. Civilizations do not emerge suddenly. They accumulate through habit, memory, and subtle shifts in perception. When the first potter experiments with new pigments, or the first builder tests a tighter joint, or the first observer tracks a star's seasonal return, each moment contributes to a slow transformation. These early Nile settlers live at the threshold of something larger, though they cannot know it. The land teaches them through floods, winds, and cycles of dryness, and they respond with resilience shaped by everyday choices. Their world is intimate, immediate, yet oriented toward continuity. In a quiet corner of a Nakada excavation trench, a small figurine carved from hippopotamus ivory emerges from the soil. It depicts a seated figure with arms folded, eyes rendered as shallow depressions. The surface feels smooth under careful brushing, its color a muted, creamy hue. Such figurines appear in several sites, though their purpose remains unclear. Some scholars interpret them as ritual objects, others as personal items. The diversity of interpretations highlights how much remains unknown, even with thousands of artifacts. Questions persist. Did these objects represent ancestors? Did they serve practical functions? Were they symbols of status? The answers remain open, resting within the object's quiet patience. These earliest settlements, Badari, Nakada, Merimda, form the cultural groundwork for Egypt's transformation. Their pottery, stoneworking, burial traditions, and symbolic expressions create a foundation not only for dynastic culture, but for the architectural imagination that will later shape temples and pyramids. And beneath some of these settlements lie those irregular stones, those unexpected alignments, those hints that something may have existed before. The emergence of Egypt begins here, with villages becoming communities, communities becoming cultural hubs, and cultural hubs moving toward complexity that the land seems to anticipate. When the first light touches the edges of Saqqara's plateau, the wind carries a fine scatter of sand that settles into the seams between ancient stones, tracing lines far older than the structures above them. When excavators kneel beside these seams, brushing gently with soft bristles, the texture beneath their fingertips shifts, moving from familiar old kingdom limestone to older, harder blocks cut with techniques that do not match Egypt's earliest dynastic phases. When the desert cools after night, these buried stones hold a muted chill, their surfaces marked by grooves spaced with a precision unusual for the 4th millennium BCE. The ground itself becomes a palimpsest, layered with decisions, revisions, and remnants of builders whose identities remain uncertain. Builders who may have shaped this land before Egypt's rising kingdoms leave their mark. At Saqqara's northern edge, ground-penetrating radar reveals rectangular voids arranged beneath the step pyramid complex in a pattern that runs slightly off the cardinal orientation used by Djoser's architects. The signal maps out subterranean corridors no more than 1.2 meters wide, their floors composed of basalt fragments fitted tightly enough that sand sifts only between microscopic gaps. When archaeologists descend into accessible sections, their lantern light flickers across stone edges that feel unusually crisp, as if shaped by abrasion rather than copper chisels. The smell of cool mineral air drifts upward, mixing with the dry scent of desert wind. Scholars debate whether these corridors belong to an early practice phase for pyramid engineering, or represent remnants of an older structure reinterpreted by later builders. The evidence suggests the possibility of both, leaving interpretation suspended in quiet uncertainty. Farther south at Abydos, excavators uncover a foundation platform lying beneath an early dynastic enclosure. The platform measures approximately 19 meters across, constructed of limestone blocks averaging 60 centimeters in thickness. The tool marks visible along their sides follow a repetitive, shallow curved motion uncommon in pre-dynastic Egypt. Observing these marks closely, researchers notice similarities to abrasion arcs seen in Ubaid period construction in ancient Iran and southern Mesopotamia. The comparison does not imply direct inheritance, but it raises questions. Did early settlers experiment with methods learned from travelers, or did they encounter structures already present and attempt to modify them with tools they possessed? The stone offers no certainty, only texture, pattern, and a quiet refusal to be rushed. In 1963, archaeologist Jean-Philippe Lauer stands near the northern retaining wall of Djoser's complex, the afternoon sun striking the limestone with a soft golden hue. The air smells of dust and warm stone, and as workers clear a trench, Lauer notices a patch of darker flooring beneath a collapsed layer of debris. The exposed surface feels different beneath his fingertips, denser, cooler, smoother. When the trench widens, a basalt pavement emerges, its blocks cut with edges sharper than any known from Egypt's third dynasty. Lauer kneels, measuring joint widths with a steel caliper. Most joints measure under 2 millimeters, impossibly tight for copper tool construction. He calls for additional brushes, instructing the team to remove sediment slowly. As the pavement expands, its alignment becomes clear. It runs northeast to southwest, conflicting with the orientation of the step pyramid above. Lanterns illuminate faint grooves along each basalt block, parallel, consistent, like tool marks left by a technique older than Egyptian masonry. The discovery forces Lauer to reconsider whether Djoser's architects built this surface or inherited it. By the end of the season, the basalt pavement is documented, mapped, and photographed. Lauer writes cautiously in his field notes, concluding that the pavement predates Djoser, but offering no assertion about its makers. The discovery does not rewrite Egyptian chronology, yet it introduces a quiet question into the archaeological record, one that remains open today. The deeper the excavations go, the more inconsistencies appear in tool signatures. Egyptian copper chisels typically create V-shaped incisions, yet several subsurface layers show U-shaped abrasion patterns, consistent with harder mineral implements or pressure-based techniques not confirmed in Egypt before 3000 BCE. Perhaps ancient workers experimented with imported tools, adapting them to local projects. Another possibility suggests that early Egyptians encountered structures built with methods they could not easily reproduce, choosing instead to repurpose what remained. The evidence hints at complexity older than written history, though confirmation remains elusive. Walking through these excavations, you might notice the muted echo of footsteps on stone, feel the coolness rising from shaded trenches, and sense the weight of time layered beneath each carved surface. Archaeology unfolds here not through dramatic revelations, but through quiet accumulation. A groove that shouldn't exist, a platform built with unfamiliar precision, a corridor aligned just slightly wrong. Each detail is small, yet together they form a pattern that invites reflection on how civilizations inherit landscapes they do not fully understand. Philosophically, the presence of earlier foundations suggests that cultural memory may reach deeper than written chronologies allow. Civilizations often build on spaces chosen for reasons long forgotten: elevated ground, stable bedrock, astronomical orientation, or the lingering impression that a site holds meaning. When Egypt's early builders select these plateaus, perhaps they respond to subtle cues in the land. Or perhaps they follow paths established by groups whose stories no longer survive. This possibility remains open, shaped by evidence rather than imagination. Several questions endure. Were the earliest Egyptian architects influenced by techniques transmitted from distant communities? Did they modify existing structures constructed by an unknown culture? How many layers lie beneath the foundations already excavated? And what additional corridors or pavements remain buried under meters of sand, waiting for future discovery? The land holds these answers quietly, preserving them through geological patience rather than narrative clarity. As the Nile Valley continues to reveal its hidden layers, the mystery of inherited foundations grows more compelling. The earliest Egyptian builders emerge not as isolated innovators, but as participants in a larger, older story, one in which the ground beneath their feet carries memories shaped long before their arrival. When the Nile brightens under the first light of dawn, and the desert carries that faint coolness that lingers just moments before heat rises, the world that will soon become Egypt stands on the edge of transformation. When Narmer unites the two lands around 3100 BCE, the riverbanks already hold centuries of accumulated habit. Stone fragments shaped by earlier hands, mud brick walls pressed by earlier palms, and foundations that lie just deep enough to blur the line between inheritance and innovation. When the earliest kings walk across these landscapes, their sandals press into ground layered with stories that no one fully remembers. The emergence of kingship does not begin from emptiness. It rises from a terrain already marked with traces of human intention. The earliest dynastic centers, Hierakonpolis, Abydos, Memphis, contain architectural signatures that feel both familiar and foreign. Walking through Hierakonpolis today, you would feel gravel crush softly beneath your feet, hear the faint whistle of wind threading through eroded mud brick, and see the remains of enclosures with recessed niches that resemble not only Egypt's earliest temples, but also structures found in early Mesopotamian cities. This niche and buttress pattern appears in Uruk around 3500 BCE, yet it arises almost simultaneously in Egypt with no clear evidence of mass migration. Scholars debate whether such architectural convergence indicates cultural exchange or parallel evolution shaped by similar needs. Some argue the style reflects administrative authority, a symbolic architecture meant to project order. Others suggest the builders may have adapted techniques observed through distant contact. The archaeological record remains balanced between possibility and restraint. At Abydos, where early rulers choose to be buried, the earth carries a deeper resonance. The royal enclosures stretch across the desert floor with elongated forms, their mud brick walls once towering several meters high. When you run your palm across surviving sections, the texture is rough yet deliberate, the bricks laid with a precision that reflects rising organizational skill. Beneath a few of these structures, excavations reveal older stone alignments, straight segments, some measuring nearly 1 meter in width, their surfaces weathered far beyond what 5,000 years of desert exposure would produce. Scholars analyze the mineral layers along these stones and note erosion patterns inconsistent with the early dynastic period. Perhaps they belong to a small earlier community. Perhaps they were repurposed from structures long collapsed. The question remains open, preserved in the silence of the subsoil. The birth of writing adds another dimension. Early hieroglyphs appear suddenly around 3200 BCE, fully formed in administrative contexts. The clay ceilings discovered at Abydos show elaborate symbols, falcons, standards, boats, rendered with clarity that suggests a system already conceptually mature. Meanwhile, Mesopotamia's proto-cuneiform developed slightly earlier, around 3300 BCE, at Uruk. Some scholars see these parallel timelines as evidence of indirect influence. Others insist each script evolves independently. The presence of cylinder seals in early Egyptian graves complicates the picture, especially when some are carved from stones not native to the Nile Valley. They introduce foreign motifs, winged figures, rosettes, geometric spirals, that do not align with Egypt's earliest artistic traditions. These objects provoke the same gentle question. How much of Egypt's early administrative system develops organically, and how much arises through channels of exchange? The sensation of continuity becomes even stronger at Memphis, the first capital. This city stands at the apex of Upper and Lower Egypt, positioned along a ridge that offers stable ground above the annual floodplain. When workers dig beneath later layers, they find compacted mud brick and limestone fragments pressed deep into the earth. Some of these fragments bear tool marks so faint they resemble the surface of worn river stones, though their arrangement suggests deliberate placement. Memphis grows rapidly during the early dynastic era, but the land beneath it shows signs of activity stretching further back. Post holes, stone sockets, and scattered shale tools that predate the earliest kings by centuries. The city feels built atop an older, quieter settlement whose identity the earth keeps half hidden. Walking through these early sites, you might notice how the wind shifts differently around raised platforms, how the light rests on stone surfaces with subtle variation, and how shadows fall into the recesses of ancient walls as though returning to familiar shapes. These sensory impressions echo something more profound. The land remembers even when culture changes. The Egyptians themselves seem aware of this memory. Their word for the first time, Zep-Tepi, refers to a mythical golden age in which the gods establish order. Scholars interpret it symbolically rather than historically, yet its presence suggests a cultural belief that creation does not begin with the present moment, but with something older, something foundational, something worth preserving. The unification of Egypt accelerates architectural ambition. Kings begin experimenting with stone on a scale unseen before. At Saqqara, Djoser's step pyramid rises, an engineering leap that transforms mud brick tradition into monumental permanence. Yet even here, beneath the white limestone facing, beneath the layers of stepped cores, lie stones whose tool marks differ from the work above. Archaeologists document them carefully, noting that some blocks appear reused from older structures. Their edges hold microscopic abrasion lines shaped not by copper chisels, but by harder mineral implements. Whether these stones originate from earlier experiments or earlier settlements is unclear. The builders of Djoser's complex seem to integrate the old into the new, not out of mystery, but out of practicality, availability, and perhaps reverence for what came before. The philosophical reflection arises naturally. Civilizations inherit landscapes the way individuals inherit memories. Not entirely understood, not entirely questioned. The terrain carries stories older than political unification, older than kingship, older than writing. And as Egypt steps into its monumental age, it steps onto ground already, shaped by hands whose names are lost. The earliest pharaohs stand at the threshold of continuity and innovation, drawing from what exists, shaping what will come, and leaving just enough ambiguity in their foundations to suggest that the blueprint beneath their feet is not entirely their own. When the old kingdom rises into full sunlight, and the stones of early monuments glow with a warm golden radiance, spread gently across the plateau, Egypt enters a phase of ambition that feels almost inevitable. When the laborers walk across the limestone bedrock at Saqqara or Giza, the earth beneath their feet holds both the weight of their steps and the quiet persistence of deeper layers shaped long before their time. When the architects sketch their plans into damp silt, using reed pens dipped in pigments drawn from the riverbanks, they stand unknowingly above foundations that may carry echoes of a much older presence. The Golden Age unfolds not as a clean beginning, but as a continuation of a story written partly in visible structures and partly in stones buried too deep for casual notice. Imagine standing along the causeway leading to Djoser's step pyramid. The air tastes slightly of dust and sun-warmed minerals, and the limestone blocks radiate a soft heat that lingers on your skin. The scale of the enclosure feels deliberate, balanced, each courtyard arranged with precision meant to guide both movement and meaning. Priests walk in measured patterns, their linen garments rustling faintly, their voices low as they recite hymns celebrating renewal. Craftsmen move through narrow workshop passages, their hands coated in gypsum or powdered stone, shaping statues that mirror the calm permanence of their surroundings. These scenes reflect a civilization confident in its order, capable of coordinating thousands of workers and harnessing both human skill and geological richness. At Giza, the horizon transforms into a geometry of power. The Great Pyramid rises with a base, measuring approximately 230 meters on each side, its casing stones once polished to brilliance, reflecting sunlight so sharply that distant travelers describe the plateau as a beacon. Imagine walking along the pyramid's foundation grid, feeling the slight incline beneath your sandals as you move toward the core. The joints between the limestone blocks remain remarkably narrow, most under a centimeter, shaped through repetitive abrasion and careful levering. The faint scent of tallow lamps clings to inner passage walls, reminding us of the countless hours spent carving corridors through solid stone. The builders rely on astronomy to set true north, aligning the pyramid with an accuracy that deviates by less than 1/15 of a degree. Scholars debate whether they use circumpolar stars or solar shadow methods, yet the precision remains a testament to their observational discipline. Daily life during this era balances simplicity with aspiration. Imagine artisans in a modest Giza, village shaping copper tools on low stone anvils, their children gathering river reeds nearby, their cooking fires producing the warm aroma of baked bread and lentil stew. Workers receive rations of beer, dates, and fresh water from communal storerooms, the clay jars stacked in cool chambers that preserve moisture against desert heat. When the sun sets, families gather outside their homes, tracing constellations in the sky, Orion, Sirius, and the Northern Star, symbols not only of celestial order, but also of the pharaoh's divine connection. The stars become quiet companions to their labor, assurances that the world operates according to a structure both natural and sacred. The temples reflect this harmony between human effort and cosmic alignment. Columns carved from limestone rise like stylized bundles of papyrus, their surfaces cool beneath the palm of the hand, their shadows falling in rhythmic patterns across paved courtyards. Priests monitor the heliacal rising of Sirius, anticipating the Nile flood that nourishes the land each year. Rituals performed at dawn carry the fragrance of incense rising into air, still touched by night's coolness. Each ceremony reinforces the belief that order flows through all things, through water levels, through celestial motions, through the architecture that channels sunlight into precise corridors. Philosophically, the Golden Age expresses confidence in continuity. Civilizations often reach their height when they believe the world aligns with their understanding of it. Yet beneath this confidence lies subtle evidence of deeper histories. When engineers dig foundation trenches, they occasionally encounter older stone layers that force adjustments to their plans. These discoveries rarely halt construction. Instead, builders incorporate earlier surfaces into their own designs, treating them as part of the landscape rather than anomalies. The reuse is practical, yet it suggests a quiet dialogue between past and present, a merging of epochs that the workers may not consciously perceive. In the quiet moments of evening, when the heat dissipates and cool air moves across the plateau, you might notice how shadows settle into the lower chambers of the pyramids, how the desert's broad expanse seems to hold its breath. The structures appear eternal, though they are newly built. Atop the plateau, the scent of limestone dust mixes with a faint sweetness carried from the Nile's distant marshes. Stars emerge in orderly patterns, their slow rotation mirroring the stability the pharaohs seek to preserve. Yet even in this era of great achievement, hints of something older remain. Stones with unfamiliar grooves, foundations misaligned with current structures, fragments of basalt too eroded to match local timelines. These details settle quietly into the background of Egypt's monumental age, waiting for future generations to notice their significance. The Golden Age stands fully formed, radiant, and confident, yet gently resting on layers shaped by hands whose identities are lost to time. When the Old Kingdom reaches its steady brilliance, daily life unfolds with a rhythm that feels both practical and ceremonial. When the early morning light glances across the limestone surfaces at Giza, workers step into their tasks with movements shaped by habit and quiet discipline. When you walk through the worker villages near the pyramids, you'd hear the soft clatter of pottery, the scrape of copper against stone, and the steady hum of conversations drifting through narrow passageways. Life here is neither chaotic nor hurried. It flows with the calm assurance of people who understand their roles within a larger system, a system anchored by structures rising slowly into the desert sky. Imagine stepping into a bakery court just after dawn. The air is warm and filled with the fragrant mixture of grain, yeast, and smoke. Rows of conical bread molds line the ground, heated from below by embers that glow like soft crimson stars. Women knead dough on stone platforms, their hands dusted with flour, their bracelets chiming gently as they work. Children carry baskets of fresh water from the central well, their footsteps leaving faint impressions in the drying clay. These scenes feel intimate, familiar, and deeply human. They remind us that monumental architecture depends on communities whose labor is as essential as the plans drawn by architects and overseers. In official workshops near the pyramid base, skilled artisans carve statues that preserve the likeness of kings and nobles. The sound of chisels echoes faintly across the courtyard, each tap producing a crisp flake of limestone that drifts to the ground with a fine whisper. The air tastes slightly chalky, infused with the smell of pulverized stone. Artisans study proportion grids etched lightly onto surfaces, guiding their hands with precision. Copper tools gleam in the sunlight, periodically dipped in abrasive slurry to maintain effectiveness. These workers embody a balance between craftsmanship and devotion, their art reflecting the calm certainty of a world designed to endure. Astronomy plays a steady role in daily activities. As night approaches, the first workers to rest gather outside their homes, watching the slow ascent of Orion above the horizon. The constellation becomes a familiar companion, a marker of time and a symbol tied to the pharaoh's divine connection. The sky feels vast, yet comforting, its stars moving through predictable cycles that reinforce a sense of cosmic order. When Sirius rises just before dawn, people note the subtle glow on the horizon, anticipating the annual flood that brings renewal to their world. Celestial patterns shape both agricultural rhythms and spiritual expectations, grounding life in cycles far older than the city itself. Along the causeways that link valley temples to the pyramid complexes, priests walk in measured procession. Their linen garments sway gently in the breeze, carrying the faint scent of incense. Ritual offerings, milk, bread, beer, and lotus blossoms, are placed in polished stone basins that feel cool beneath the fingertips. These rituals reinforce the pharaoh's connection to cosmic forces. They also echo traditions that may stretch deeper than recorded history. Some carved symbols on early offering tables resemble motifs found in distant lands, though the meanings remain debated. Scholars consider whether these similarities arise independently or signal faint traces of cultural exchange. The question remains open, lying quietly beneath the surface. In the midst of these grand achievements, life retains its quieter tones. Families gather around small hearths at dusk, sharing simple meals while recounting stories shaped by memory and imagination. Children draw shapes in the dust with sticks, tracing outlines of animals, boats, and stars. The smell of cooked fish, lentils, and herbs drifts softly through the evening air. A sense of collective purpose binds the community. Each household plays a role within a system that balances labor, ritual, and continuity. The world feels stable, predictable, serene. In the fourth dynasty, a stonecutter named Hapu begins his morning in a trench near the Great Pyramid's foundation. The sun has just cleared the eastern ridge, casting a soft glow across the site. His hands, still cold from the night air, wrap around a copper chisel that warms slowly as he grips it. Beneath his feet lies a layer of limestone, already partly shaped for the day's work. As Hapu clears away loose fragments with a reed brush, his chisel strikes something unexpectedly hard. The sound rings differently, sharper, deeper. Brushing away more dust, he reveals the edge of a darker block tucked beneath the familiar limestone layer. The stone is basalt, its surface unnaturally smooth. Hapu calls for a foreman, who arrives and kneels beside him, running fingers along, grooves spaced so evenly that they appear intentional. The basalt block does not align with the current foundation grid. It angles slightly, following a direction that predates the pyramid's design. The foreman instructs Hapu to expose more of the surface. As the team clears sediment, an entire row of basalt emerges, fitted so tightly that no reed slips between the joints. By midday, the block is measured, documented, and left in place. The overseer orders the limestone to be laid above it according to plan. The workers continue, accepting the stone as part of the ground itself. Hapu returns to his task, but the feel of the basalt lingers in his mind, a smooth, silent reminder that someone shaped this land before him. These discoveries, though quiet, shape how we understand Egypt's golden age. The civilization thrives through engineering precision, administrative organization, and spiritual cohesion. Yet within the stones they place, and the stones they uncover, lie hints of older worlds, fragments waiting beneath layers of history. The brilliance of this era rests comfortably on its surface achievements, but beneath that surface, stories continue to gather, shaped by hands both known and forgotten. When the sun rises over Memphis during the height of Egypt's golden age, the sky blushes with a muted copper glow that settles across temples, workshops, and distant pyramid silhouettes. When priests step into the courtyards of the great enclosures, their sandals whisper against stone still cool from the night, carrying with them a sense of measured purpose. When artisans open their shutters to let morning light spill across polished tools, the world feels organized by a rhythm, both human and celestial. Egypt at its height is not simply a kingdom. It is a choreography, a seamless merging of labor, devotion, and cosmic understanding. Imagine standing at the entrance of a temple complex aligned precisely to cardinal points. The limestone beneath your feet holds traces of countless footsteps, its surface slightly smoothed by time. Incense coils upward in delicate streams, leaving a faint sweetness in the air. Columns rise like bundled reeds hardened into stone, their painted surfaces still vivid with greens and reds. The scent of heated oils drifts from nearby workshops where scribes prepare pigments for ritual texts. Everything around you feels intentional, from the angle of sunlight cutting through the hypo-style hall to the placement of offering tables that remain cool even under midday heat. Here, architecture does more than shelter. It shapes experience, directs emotion, and reminds every visitor of the cosmic order Egypt believes sustains the world. Daily life continues beyond temple walls in equally deliberate patterns. Farmers near the Nile tend fields along irrigation channels that shimmer under the bright sky. Children help gather flax, their fingers brushing against the fibrous stems, absorbing textures that will one day become linen garments. Fishermen haul nets from shallow inlets, the smell of river water mixing with warm reeds nearby. Much like the stars above, daily routines follow cycles passed down through generations. The people believe continuity ensures survival, and so their actions mirror celestial motions, steady, reliable, and quietly powerful. In artisan districts, a different rhythm echoes. Copper tools ring softly against diorite, obsidian, and limestone, as sculptors refine statues meant to honor kings, queens, and gods. The taste of stone dust lingers in the air, slightly metallic. Workers dip chisels into cool water to prevent heat from dulling their edges. Scribes seated nearby record inventories on clay tablets or sheets of papyrus, their reed pens creating smooth, rhythmic strokes. These sounds weave together, chisel taps, reed scratches, muffled conversations, to form a gentle tapestry of creation. Egypt's grandeur depends not only on pharaohs, but on the hands of thousands, shaping materials into meaning. Night brings its own beauty. When stars appear, the priests watch for Orion's ascent, interpreting its position as a sign of royal lineage and cosmic legitimacy. Families gather on rooftops to feel the cooler air brushing lightly across their skin. The Milky Way stretches overhead, resembling the celestial river described in myth. Its slow arc across the sky reassures them that the universe follows patterns both ancient and trustworthy. Astronomy is not a separate discipline. It is embedded in architecture, agriculture, and ritual, shaping how Egyptians see themselves within the vastness above. In the 5th dynasty, a young priest named Meneh stands near the eastern gate of a solar temple built for the worship of Ra. It is the morning of the festival of first light, and the courtyard smells of lotus blossoms and freshly ground incense. The temple, aligned precisely with the rising sun during the equinox, holds an air of anticipation. Menet's hands tremble slightly as he carries a polished alabaster bowl filled with sacred water. As the horizon brightens, Menet takes his place among senior priests. The first rays emerge, sliding through the narrow opening carved into the temple's stone frame. The light travels along a leveled path, illuminating a golden statue of Ra positioned deep within the sanctuary. The statue glows with a brilliance that momentarily blinds Menet, reflecting warm light onto his face. He feels heat spreading gently across his palms as he raises the alabaster bowl. Elders chant in measured tones, their voices resonating through the colonnade. The ritual symbolizes the moment creation begins anew each day. Menet steps forward, pouring the water slowly into a carved basin. The liquid catches the sunlight, creating shimmering patterns that ripple across surrounding walls. For a brief moment, the courtyard feels suspended in time, held in balance between earth, sun, and memory. As the chanting ends, the light shifts slightly, returning the sanctuary to its more subdued glow. Menet lowers his head, feeling both humbled and strengthened. He has performed the ritual without error. The elders nod quietly. This success marks his first recognition within the priesthood. The temple returns to its usual rhythms, yet Menet carries the moment with him, understanding that rituals endure because people choose to enact them faithfully. Stories like Menet's remind us that Egypt's greatness is not only measured in monumental structures, but in the steady devotion of individuals who keep traditions alive. The Golden Age thrives because countless people act with purpose, grounding their world in cycles both earthly and celestial. As daily life continues across the Nile Valley, families cooking evening meals, astronomers studying star charts, stonecutters shaping the next generation of monuments, a gentle truth settles across the land. Even in its brilliance, Egypt rests atop layers of deeper history, layers that remain patient, waiting for future hands to uncover their meaning. When night settles over the Giza Plateau, the air cools with a gentle steadiness that feels almost ancient, and the stones of the pyramids soften into shadowed silhouettes beneath a sky bright enough to guide entire generations. When the stars appear, sharp, unwavering, scattered like quiet promises across the dark, they illuminate more than the desert. They reveal patterns that shaped Egypt's golden age and hint at older ways of watching the heavens, ways that may have traveled from distant lands long before the first pharaoh claimed divine authority. When you tilt your head upward in this imagined past, you see the sky not as a backdrop, but as a map, a calendar, and a memory all at once. Imagine standing between the Great Pyramid and the Pyramid of Khafre, the limestone beneath your feet still radiating a mild warmth from the day. A faint breeze moves across the desert, carrying the smell of cool sand and distant marsh reeds. Above you, Orion rises slowly, its belt angled in a way that mirrors the arrangement of the three great pyramids below. Scholars debate whether this correlation is intentional, yet the alignment to cardinal directions, true north achieved with astonishing precision, comes from sky-watching practices honed over countless nights. Egyptians observe circumpolar stars that never dip below the horizon, seeing in them symbols of eternity. These stars, undying in their cycle, become linked to the soul of the king, assuring continuity between earthly rule and cosmic permanence. Astronomical skill reaches far beyond simple observation. Temple axes align toward solstices, equinoxes, or the heliacal rising of Sirius, whose first appearance each summer heralds the coming flood of the Nile. Priests mark this moment with rituals that blend practical necessity and spiritual awe. The rising of Sirius becomes not just a celestial event, but a reassurance that the world remains in balance. Yet when comparing Egypt's sky lore with that of early Mesopotamia, subtle parallels appear: shared interest in specific stars, similar interpretations of celestial cycles, overlapping mythic associations. Scholars do not claim direct inheritance, but these resonances invite quiet reflection. Perhaps multiple cultures respond to the sky in comparable ways, or perhaps faint traces of older traditions travel slowly through time. Walking along the terrace of a solar temple, you notice carved notches on stone surfaces used for shadow tracking. The edges feel smooth beneath your hand, worn by years of measurement and care. Priests use wooden sighting tools, stretching cords taut to establish alignment. Some measurements rely on observing the moment a star crosses the meridian, producing an accuracy that astonishes modern researchers. The techniques may be indigenous, refined through observation, or they may reflect older methods carried by travelers whose identities are lost. The question lingers softly, unresolved yet compelling. At Heliopolis, the center of solar theology, priests gather before dawn to watch the sky shift through shades of violet and pale gold. The rising sun touches the tip of the Ben stone, the sacred symbol of creation, casting a thin beam of light across the courtyard. The air here smells of incense mixed with morning dew. Rituals unfold with measured steps, their cadence echoing the slow, unhurried movement of celestial bodies. The priests interpret sun cycles, lunar phases, and planetary motions with a blend of mathematics and myth. Mesopotamian star lists from earlier eras show similar categories and sequences. The parallels raise gentle questions. Do both civilizations arrive at similar conclusions independently, or do ideas migrate quietly between distant peoples? The evidence hints toward connection, though not conclusively. Imagine traveling upriver at night, a small ferry gliding along calm water. The stars reflect on the surface, trembling slightly as the boat shifts. Families sit along the deck, pointing out constellations they recognize, linking them to stories passed down from elders. These tales weave together practical knowledge and cosmic wonder, narratives explaining seasons, floods, and the invisible forces guiding the world. When the boat passes a temple under construction, its foundation trenches illuminated by torchlight, you sense how architecture and sky remain intertwined. The builders align each wall with deliberate care, ensuring the structure participates in celestial order. This union of earth and sky becomes one of Egypt's defining principles. Philosophically, astronomy reveals something deeper about a civilization's worldview. Sky watching transforms vastness into pattern, offering a sense of continuity across generations. The Egyptians believed the cosmos reflects a balance they must maintain through ritual and governance. Their monuments serve as fixed points in a landscape shaped by cycles: flood, harvest, decay, rebirth. Yet beneath some structures lie older stones, aligned to angles subtly different from later constructions. These inherited orientations suggest earlier sky practices, perhaps based on different stars or earlier epochs of precession. If remnants of another culture once occupied the plateau, their celestial traditions may linger faintly beneath Egypt's grand designs. As the night deepens, stars sharpen against the darkness, creating an impression of timelessness. The desert becomes soundless, the pyramids steady, the sky vast but intimate. These moments remind us that civilizations express themselves not only through stone, but through the way they understand the heavens. Egypt's golden age stands luminous because its builders anchor themselves to forces far beyond their control, yet deeply within their comprehension. And even within this harmony between architecture and sky, small irregularities stray. Alignments, deeper foundations, older orientations settle quietly into the background, reminding us that beneath every era of clarity lies a layer shaped by those who came before. When you stand before the pyramids in full daylight, their edges sharp against a pale blue sky, it's easy to believe that everything meaningful lies on the surface. When the sun glints across the limestone, illuminating joints so fine that even modern tools struggle to reproduce them, the visible world seems complete. But when we shift our attention beneath the foundations, into layers of bedrock shaped long before Egypt's kings carved their names into stone, another story begins to whisper. Hidden architecture, unseen alignments, and quiet traces of earlier planning linger below the monuments we know so well. Imagine placing your hand on a lower foundation block at Giza. The stone is cool, dense, and carries a faint grain that runs diagonally, a sign of sediment compression over millions of years. Yet here and there, beneath the expected layers, archaeologists encounter seams that don't follow geological logic. Some seams run at shallow angles, others form straight edges that mirror human design. Perhaps erosion once carved these shapes, or perhaps earlier builders quarried and shaped these stones long before Egypt's rise. The ground holds memory with remarkable patience, preserving the subtle signatures of those who moved through this landscape in distant ages. Modern geological surveys reveal further curiosities. Ground-penetrating radar shows pockets of disturbed earth beneath certain temple courtyards, areas where the soil composition differs from the natural plateau. These zones appear intentionally filled, their density contrasting sharply with surrounding layers. Scholars propose that Old Kingdom engineers may have leveled ancient depressions, but alternative thinkers suggest older construction, erased and built over. The debate continues quietly, supported by measurements of subsurface cavities, most of which remain unexcavated. What if these depressions once formed the outlines of older chambers? What if foundations were placed here precisely because the surface already carried a structural memory? Symbolism deepens the mystery further. The Benben stone, obelisks, and pyramidion fragments evoke a primordial hill rising from the waters of creation. Egypt's myths describe an ancestral mound emerging from the abyss, a place where light first touched the world. These symbols echo across millennia of Egyptian culture, but some researchers note that similar themes appear in even older Mesopotamian traditions. The notion of a sacred hill, a hidden foundation supporting visible life, may be more ancient than the Egyptians themselves. Perhaps these symbolic echoes arise independently, or perhaps faint cultural memories migrate across time, shaping myth and architecture in ways we cannot fully trace. Walking along an inner corridor of the Great Pyramid, you feel the air shift. The walls, polished smooth in some places and left rough in others, absorb sound differently than expected. Sections of granite, transported from Aswan nearly 900 kilometers away, resonate faintly when tapped, producing tones that linger longer than limestone. Some researchers explore acoustic properties, noting that certain chambers amplify low frequencies while dampening higher ones. Why such precision? The mainstream explanation centers on structural stability, yet the measurements suggest deliberate tuning. What if sound played a symbolic or ritual role? What if resonance served as an unseen language, a hidden dimension of architectural meaning. Silence becomes another teacher in these spaces. In the king's chamber, breath seems to settle slowly, as if the room absorbs motion. Stillness thickens the air, creating a feeling of suspended time. Here, granite blocks weighing up to 70 tons rest with joints so precise that a blade of metal cannot slide between them. Engineers marvel at the logistics, noting sled systems, lubricated surfaces, and organized labor. Yet even with rational tools, the achievement feels extraordinary. And in the stillness, another question rises gently. Why here? Why this exact chamber, aligned so precisely to cardinal points? The answers vary. Structural necessity, religious symbolism, astronomical alignment. But beneath these explanations lies the deeper truth that architecture often embodies layers of purpose, some visible, some hidden, some quietly waiting. Consider the shafts extending outward from deep interior chambers. Their angles correspond to key stars, Orion's belt, Sirius, Thuban, marking celestial cycles and guiding symbolic pathways for the soul. The alignments work mathematically, astronomically, and spiritually. Yet the shaft's narrow dimensions make their construction technologically impressive and somewhat perplexing. The question arises softly. Did these alignments originate entirely within Egyptian genius? Or do they reflect knowledge inherited, preserved, or rediscovered from an earlier system of sky watching? The evidence hints but never confirms, encouraging patience rather than certainty. As we move across these hidden layers, geological, architectural, symbolic, we begin to sense how Egypt builds not only on stone, but on memory. The visible kingdom represents mastery, order, and precision. Beneath it lies a quieter realm, a world of seams, cavities, resonances, and discarded clues that challenge our assumptions. Egypt's builders created wonders, but they also inherited landscapes shaped by forces and perhaps by peoples we no longer recognize. Some mysteries remain unsolved. Some patterns linger without explanation. And beneath the monuments that define Egypt's golden age, earlier stories rest in silence, waiting to rise gently into the light. When the midday sun glides across the walls of Karnak or Abydos, carved, symbols brighten for a moment before settling back into muted shadow, as if the stones briefly inhale light before returning to their patient stillness. When you stand near these inscriptions, the grooves feel deliberate beneath your fingertips, each line cut with steady pressure, each symbol carrying meaning both obvious and hidden. When we examine these carvings closely, we notice something intriguing, motifs that appear older than the dynasties that claim them. Curved lines, star clusters, serpentine patterns, and stylized figures echo shapes found in distant regions and earlier epochs. The question rises gently. Who first imagined these forms, and how far back do their origins truly reach? Imagine entering the temple of Seti I at Abydos, the air cool and faintly scented with dust. Torches flicker softly, revealing walls lined with hieroglyphs arranged in harmonic sequences. Among them lie symbols older than the pharaoh himself, emblems that resemble constellations mapped by early sky watchers. Some align with documented Egyptian star lists, while others match no known catalog. Perhaps these symbols represent forgotten narratives, or perhaps they preserve fragments of a worldview inherited from cultures long vanished. The stone does not tell us outright, but its quiet presence encourages us to look deeper. Modern archaeology provides tools that uncover layers beneath the visible. Researchers use multispectral imaging to analyze pigments embedded in grooves less than a millimeter deep. Hidden under later carvings lie faint outlines, shapes that predate the final inscriptions by centuries. The deeper lines sometimes form geometric patterns resembling early Mesopotamian star maps, though the connection remains debated. Scholars propose that Egyptian scribes adapted foreign ideas, blending them into their own symbolic system. Others argue that these similarities arise from shared human observation of the sky. What if the overlap comes from an even older tradition, one seeded before Egypt's unification, perhaps before writing itself emerged? In the Valley of the Kings, tomb ceilings explode with celestial artwork. The goddess Nut stretches across the sky, her elongated form representing the arch of heaven. Her body is filled with stars, points arranged in repeating clusters that track astronomical cycles with impressive accuracy. The air in these chambers feels still, thick with the scent of mineral pigments and aged plaster. But when light skims across the ceiling, some star clusters appear out of place, angled differently than those surrounding them. Perhaps they mark precession shifts, or perhaps they memorialize a sky pattern passed down from an earlier society observing the heavens from a different latitude. Hidden symbolism extends beyond stars. Consider the recurring image of the serpent, coiled, infinite, regenerative. Egypt links it to protection and cosmic order, yet similar serpent motifs appear in Sumerian, Akkadian, and even earlier Ubaid artwork. These representations share proportions and curvature, as if guided by a shared memory. Scholars acknowledge the possibility of cultural transmission via trade routes. Others note that certain serpent images in Egypt possess stylistic flares not found in later dynasties, hinting that the earliest examples may have originated from an unidentified source. What if these designs belong to a tradition older than both civilizations, carried through generations like a quiet inheritance? Acoustic studies of temple chambers add another layer to the hidden dimension. Some sanctuaries magnify low frequencies that match the natural resonance of the human chest cavity. Experiments reveal that specific chants vibrate walls, causing faint harmonic patterns that can be felt through fingertips resting lightly on stone. This phenomenon appears intentional, yet methods used to shape these reverberations remain uncertain. One interpretation suggests that Egyptian builders discovered these resonances through trial and error. Another proposes inherited knowledge, an architectural language passed down from unseen predecessors. The silence between each echo invites speculation, but never certainty. Artistic symbolism also reveals paradoxes. The Djed pillar, symbolizing stability, appears in early dynasties with a design more complex than its later, simplified forms. The earliest versions show multiple crossbars and detailed texturing, resembling structural elements not found in Egyptian architecture, but present in ancient Near Eastern carvings. This complexity fades over time, suggesting the Egyptians remembered the symbol, but gradually lost some aspect of its original function. Perhaps the Djed once represented an engineering device, or perhaps it symbolized a ritual structure inherited without full understanding. Even mythology carries hints. Creation tales speak of a primeval age when gods walked the earth, building temples and shaping landscapes. Mainstream scholars view these as metaphorical expressions of natural cycles and political authority. Yet alternative interpretations suggest these stories echo memories of earlier cultures, human or otherwise, whose achievements became mythologized over millennia. The persistence of these narratives across regions encourages thoughtful reflection rather than literal belief. As we trace these symbols, their origins shift between clarity and shadow. Some meanings remain precise, others blur into possibility. The stones offer glimpses, but never reveal everything. Egypt's mastery is undeniable, yet woven through its achievements are threads that feel inherited, adapted, or carried from a past more distant than recorded history. Beneath the visible kingdom lies an unseen inheritance, etched subtly into art and architecture, reminding us that even the greatest civilizations rise within the footprints of those who came before. When you stand beside the unfinished obelisk at Aswan, its surface warm beneath your palm, you feel the weight of a question that has endured for thousands of years. When the granite reflects the sunlight in muted flashes, the grooves along its sides, some straight, some curved, hint at techniques that seem both familiar and impossibly advanced. When researchers kneel beside these marks, measuring depth and direction, they find a blend of tool signatures that match copper chisels, and others that remain unexplained. Egypt's accomplishments clearly belong to human ingenuity, yet scattered through the evidence are details that feel older, quieter, as if inherited from a tradition whose teachers have vanished into deep time. Imagine descending into the lower cavities beneath Giza, where narrow passages run through bedrock shaped with patience and precision. The air grows cooler, carrying a faint mineral scent that settles softly along the walls. Flashlights reveal surfaces smoothed to a near-polished finish, although the tools used should have struggled with this hardness. Some cuts follow perfect linear paths. Others form curves so consistent they suggest rotational movement. Perhaps water and abrasives played a larger role than we assume. Or perhaps the techniques evolved from earlier experiments conducted by hands we can no longer name. The silence in these chambers feels deliberate, as if the earth itself safeguards memories too faint for certainty. Ground-penetrating surveys beneath Saqqara uncover geometric voids aligned with an accuracy difficult to explain through simple excavation. These cavities, rectangular, consistent, and arranged with mathematical precision, appear older than the structures above them. The mainstream interpretation proposes abandoned storage chambers from early dynasties. Alternative views suggest something more complex, foundational grids or architectural tests created long before Egypt unified. What if these voids formed the skeleton of an earlier city? What if Egypt's architects built atop a blueprint they did not fully understand but recognized as significant? Each possibility invites reflection, though none claim definitive truth. Acoustic experiments deepen the mystery. In certain granite sarcophagus chambers, sound behaves with uncanny sensitivity. A low hum produced by voice alone reverberates through the stone, creating standing waves that shift subtly as you move through the space. Modern engineers measure these frequencies, noting their stability and the chamber's near-perfect symmetry. Did Egyptian builders discover these effects through intuition and practice? Or did they inherit architectural principles from traditions that valued resonance as much as structure? The stillness of these chambers, thick and patient, leaves room for either explanation. Material studies add further complexity. The basalt floors at Giza contain patterns of microfracturing that do not match typical quarrying techniques. Some surfaces appear heat-treated, though not in a way consistent with fire setting. Granite boxes at Serapeum exhibit interior corners cut with a precision that challenges copper tools. Scholars attribute this to long-term abrasion, repeated polishing, and exceptional craftsmanship. Yet certain marks suggest rapid removal rather than slow shaping. What if the Egyptians used methods now lost, tools of stone, sand, and pressure, combined in ways we no longer practice? What if earlier cultures refined techniques that survived only as echoes within Egyptian mastery? Symbolic carvings sometimes intensify these questions. At Abydos, a relief depicting the raising of the Djed shows a structure lifted with ropes, poles, and coordinated effort. It is clearly a ceremonial act. Yet the earliest depictions include additional elements, horizontal supports, angled braces, no longer present in later versions. Engineers studying these images note that they resemble stabilization devices used for heavy lifting. Perhaps the symbols once illustrated forgotten engineering knowledge, preserved ritually long after the original technique faded. The temple walls remain silent, but their symbols speak of memories expressed through tradition rather than instruction. Imagine walking through the hypostyle hall at Karnak at dusk. Shadows stretch across the columns, each carved with layered inscriptions. The air tastes faintly of dust and cool stone. You run your hand along the base of a pillar and notice the smoothness, the subtle curvature, the precision of spacing between each column. This hall required mathematical planning far beyond simple measurement. Columns align not only with one another, but with solar axes, festival routes, and earlier temple footprints. Beneath the visible structure lies an invisible network of inherited alignments, geometric rules that may trace back to predecessors whose architecture has not survived. Perhaps Egypt perfected these principles. Perhaps they adapted them. The stillness around you offers no answer, only a quiet invitation to wonder. Some mysteries linger not because they defy explanation, but because multiple explanations remain possible. Egyptian mastery is undeniable, grounded in evidence, skill, and ingenuity. Yet scattered through their accomplishments are faint signatures, hidden cuts, unusual voids, unexpected alignments, suggesting deeper layers of history embedded within their foundations. As we follow these threads, one truth settles gently. Some knowledge endures, some dissolves, and some passes quietly from one civilization to the next, leaving behind only the smallest clues. Beneath Egypt's visible brilliance lies a machinery of stone shaped by hands both known and forgotten, a testament to human creativity woven with whispers of a past still concealed in the patient silence of the earth. When we stand before Egypt's oldest monuments, feeling the desert wind move gently across the plateau while shadows lengthen against polished stone, a quiet question rises that no era has fully answered. When the foundations beneath these structures reveal seams cut at odd angles, older than the visible architecture above them, curiosity deepens. When similarities appear between Egypt's earliest symbols and those of distant civilizations, the debate widens into what scholars sometimes call the Great Convergence question. Did Egypt arise entirely from its own genius, or did it inherit fragments of a much older world, human or otherwise, now dissolved into silence? Some scholars believe the answer lies fully in Egypt's soil. They suggest that climate shifts following the African humid period forced pastoral groups toward the Nile, where population density encouraged innovation. According to this view, the brilliance of early dynastic culture emerges through gradual development: pottery, agriculture, stoneworking, each building upon earlier skills. Others suggest something less linear. They point to anomalies, stone blocks that appear reused from earlier constructions, symbols found in pre-dynastic tombs with no clear cultural lineage, and deep-cut bedrock trenches whose purpose remains uncertain. Maybe these are simply remnants of abandoned experiments, or maybe they reflect knowledge carried from an older civilization now erased by time. A few imagine an even broader possibility. that global migrations during remote prehistory carried ideas across vast distances. When comparing early Egyptian astronomical practices with those of Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and even the Indus region, patterns emerge. Alignments to solstices, reverence for certain star groups, and the motif of a primeval mound appear repeatedly. Perhaps these similarities arise independently, shaped by universal human observation. Or perhaps travelers carried stories and symbols that settled quietly into local traditions. We may never know the precise pathways, but the echo of shared themes encourages humility. Civilizations rarely form in isolation. Archaeologists studying bedrock chambers beneath Giza note their unusual orientation. Some chambers align with the pyramid above, while others diverge by several degrees, following directions not used in Old Kingdom layout. One interpretation proposes that these chambers served earlier ceremonial functions. Another suggests they are natural fissures shaped by erosion. Yet the edges of a few cavities display straight cuts, as though shaped with deliberate intention. Perhaps early dynastic builders repurposed these spaces. Or perhaps they discovered remnants of structures older than their own architectural traditions. The evidence remains quiet, neither confirming nor dismissing any single perspective. Mythology complicates the question in intriguing ways. Egyptian texts speak of a Zep-Tepi, the first time, when gods or divine beings shaped the world and established the order later humans maintained. Mainstream scholars interpret this symbolically, viewing it as a poetic expression of origins. Yet alternative thinkers wonder whether these myths preserve memories of earlier human societies, their achievements amplified through storytelling until they became divine. Similar myths appear across cultures: a golden age, a founding race, a moment when knowledge first entered the world. Maybe these stories reflect human longing for origins, or maybe they contain faint memories of cultures whose remains lie hidden beneath younger layers. We may never know which interpretation holds more truth. Cross-cultural comparisons offer additional puzzles. The precision of early Egyptian stone cutting resembles techniques seen in pre-Incan Andean sites. Tight joints, polished surfaces, interlocking blocks. These parallels may be coincidental, arising from similar needs and available materials. Yet some researchers note unique similarities in the angles and curvature of certain cuts. What if ancient technologies emerged independently in multiple regions? What if knowledge spread slowly along forgotten routes? Or what if the similarities reflect a deeper, shared inheritance that predates recorded history? Once again, answers drift beyond reach. Philosophically, the Great Convergence debate reveals more about us than about the ancient world. Humans seek origins, clarity, linear narratives. We prefer beginnings we can name. But deep time rarely behaves so neatly. Civilizations rise within landscapes shaped by countless earlier hands, many of which leave no inscriptions or monuments. Egypt's greatness does not diminish if it built atop older foundations, nor does it diminish if those foundations are simply the work of natural forces. Perhaps the beauty lies in the interplay: human innovation layered upon geological memory, myth layered upon observation, structure layered upon silence. As we consider competing theories, the truth settles gently into place. Some evidence supports independent development. Some points toward inheritance. Some remains ambiguous, resisting even the most careful interpretation. And some, hidden beneath bedrock, lost to erosion, dissolved by time, may never return to us. We may never know the full story of Egypt's earliest influences. We may never know whether an older civilization once stood beneath its sands. We may never know whether symbols shared across continents reflect migration, coincidence, or something more mysterious. Yet perhaps uncertainty carries its own quiet gift. The mystery invites us to keep looking, keep listening, keep wondering, not to find definitive answers, but to appreciate the layered complexity of human history. Beneath Egypt's greatness lie questions that endure with steady patience, reminding us that some knowledge remains hidden not to frustrate us, but to deepen our reverence for the vast tapestry of time. When you walk across the Giza Plateau at dusk, the wind softens and the horizon glows with the last muted traces of sunlight, turning the pyramids into calm silhouettes that seem older than the sky itself. When shadows stretch across the desert floor, pooling gently around foundation stones and weathered blocks, a quiet awareness settles in. The awareness that for all our measurements, excavations, surveys, and theories, the earth still keeps more secrets than it reveals. When we kneel beside these ancient cuts in stone, brushing away grains of sand with patient hands, we confront questions that linger in the stillness, questions that resist closure. Some scholars believe Egypt's earliest achievements arise from environmental opportunity, the Nile's predictable cycles, the availability of workable limestone, the concentration of skilled labor. Others suggest something more layered, that Egypt inherited fragments of knowledge from forgotten pastoral cultures that migrated through the region long before unification. A few imagine an even older memory preserved in oral traditions, a faint echo of societies erased by climate, shifts, or catastrophic events. Perhaps these memories seeded architectural ideas. Maybe they influenced symbolic systems, or maybe they exist only as human attempts to connect with an unknowable past. We may never know which explanation lies closest to truth. Consider the strange precision of certain structures, foundation blocks leveled to fractions of a degree, alignments so accurate that they still map celestial events thousands of years later, bedrock trenches cut with geometric consistency. Engineers propose plausible methods: plumb bobs, star sighting, water leveling. Archaeologists highlight organized labor and generational knowledge. Yet some details remain stubborn. Why do earlier layers beneath later constructions show different orientations? Why do some underground chambers appear more eroded, as if they were already old when Egyptians shaped the plateau? Perhaps shifts in climate altered erosion patterns. Perhaps quarrying techniques changed over time. Or maybe, earlier culture used the site differently, leaving behind traces too faint to identify. We may never know. Mythology complicates this further. Egyptian creation stories describe a first time, a moment when order emerged from chaos, when the gods shaped the world from a primordial hill. Mainstream scholarship interprets this as symbolic cosmology linked to natural cycles. Alternative perspectives wonder whether these stories carry inherited memories, transformed over millennia. The same tension appears in myths from Sumer, Akkad, and the Levant, tales of beings bringing knowledge, of cities rising suddenly, of disasters reshaping the world. Maybe these are universal human metaphors. Maybe they reflect cross-cultural memory of real events. Or maybe they are something in between, an interwoven tapestry of imagination and observation. The ambiguity endures, patient and unresolved. Cross-continental parallels widen the question rather than narrowing it. Stone-cutting techniques in ancient Peru resemble certain joints in Egypt. Water channels carved into bedrock at Petra resemble earlier Egyptian methods. Star lore in early China mirrors portions of Nile-based astronomy. Scholars argue for independent invention, shaped by similar needs and environments. Others propose slow diffusion of ideas through migration or trade. A few imagine forgotten epochs of global connection, erased by time's dissolving reach. Perhaps humanity has always shared patterns of problem-solving. Perhaps memories drift further and last longer than we expect. Or perhaps we project connection where none existed. We may never know which interpretation carries the deepest truth. Standing before the Valley Temple at Giza, you might notice how the massive granite blocks, some weighing over 80 tons, fit together with muted perfection. The smoothness beneath your hand feels almost unnatural in its consistency. Engineers reconstruct lifting methods using sledges, rope teams, lubricated, tracks, and earthen ramps. These explanations hold weight, yet certain cuts inside the temple feel older than the rest, as if the Egyptians reused blocks that already carried marks of earlier intent. Maybe these blocks came from previous monuments. Maybe they were quarried in unusual ways. Or maybe they represent inherited techniques passed down across generations until their origins faded. The temple remains silent, but its silence feels meaningful. Philosophically, the great questions turn us inward. What do we seek when we search for origins, certainty, continuity, reassurance that the world fits into coherent sequences we can name and categorize? Yet history rarely offers such clarity. Civilizations rise not from singular beginnings, but from countless interactions, environmental, social, symbolic, and perhaps even mythic. Egypt's greatness stands firmly on its own achievements, yet acknowledging the possibility of older influences does not diminish them. Instead, it expands our sense of wonder, reminding us that human knowledge is a long, layered river, fed by tributaries we can no longer trace. As we reflect on these competing ideas, one truth emerges gently. The value of mystery is not in solvability, but in the invitation it offers. Mystery encourages humility, curiosity, and patience. It reminds us that history is larger than our records, deeper than our excavations, and quieter than our interpretations. We may never know whether Egypt built atop an older city. We may never know whether echoes of another civilization shaped its early symbols. We may never know whether the plateau itself holds memories predating dynastic rule. Yet perhaps the unanswered questions make the story richer. Perhaps not knowing keeps the past alive. Perhaps silence is its own form of knowledge, one that invites us to listen more deeply to the earth beneath our feet. When the desert wind brushes gently across the stones at Giza, carrying grain-sized echoes of centuries, it reminds us that memory is not something civilizations lose all at once. When you stand there today, looking at monuments shaped more than 4,000 years ago, you feel the presence of people who tried, in their own ways, to leave hints for those who would follow. When the inscriptions, myths, and architectural patterns unfold beneath our hands, they reveal stories that have survived not through perfect preservation, but through resilience, reinterpretation, and the quiet determination of generations who refuse to let meaning fade completely. Egypt's own memory keepers understood the fragility of knowledge. Scribes copied religious texts with meticulous care, repeating hymns, creation stories, and historical accounts on papyrus that sometimes survived only because the desert air offered its patient protection. Oral traditions carried narratives from elders to children, preserving mythic cycles even when political shifts erased older lineages. Carved reliefs on temple walls immortalized rituals, ensuring that, even if the priests vanished, the gestures and symbols would still whisper across time. And still today, these inscriptions allow us to trace glimpses of how Egypt understood itself, layer by layer. Yet some memories slipped underground, literally. Beneath temple floors, in sealed niches and hidden chambers, priests stored ritual objects meant to communicate with future generations or divine beings. These caches often contain foundation deposits, miniature tools, figurines, offerings, symbolizing renewal and continuity. Even now, archaeologists uncover such deposits, brushing away sand to reveal objects last touched by human hands thousands of years ago. Each discovery reminds us that memory can wait quietly when needed, preserved in silence until the right moment returns. Modern rediscovery shapes the legacy as much as ancient intention. When Flinders Petrie measured blocks with unprecedented accuracy in the late 19th century, Hibasigti revealed engineering principles long underestimated. When modern teams used ground-penetrating radar across the Giza Plateau, they mapped subsurface anomalies hinting at older structures, reviving questions about what lies beneath Egypt's most iconic monuments. Even now, researchers refine radiocarbon dating and sediment analysis, uncovering new timelines that challenge earlier assumptions. Clues continue to emerge, and each discovery adjusts our understanding gently, never violently, as if history prefers unfolding rather than revealing all at once. Still today, astronomy helps decode ancient intentions. Star charts, satellite tracking, and digital modeling show how temples align with celestial events across eras. The same constellations that guided Egyptian priests appear above us, unchanged, offering a calm continuity that transcends the rise and fall of civilizations. When we look at Orion in the night sky, we follow a line of sight shared with countless observers from Egypt's past. Stars become threads binding present to ancient memory, unaffected by sandstorms, dynastic collapse, or forgotten languages. Cross-cultural studies also shape the legacy. Researchers compare Egyptian symbols with Mesopotamian, Levantine, and Anatolian counterparts, tracing ideas that may have traveled slowly across deserts and river valleys. Some connections remain speculative, yet even speculation keeps the conversation alive. We explore similarities not to claim certainty, but to appreciate how human thought evolves through contact, curiosity, and shared wonder. The act of comparison becomes part of the legacy, an ongoing dialogue across disciplines and cultures. Perhaps the most enduring legacy comes from the mysteries themselves. Even now, questions about hidden chambers beneath the pyramids, the origins of certain symbols, the purpose of subterranean complexes, and the existence of earlier civilizations linger with gentle persistence. We may never know the full truth behind these anomalies, but maybe that uncertainty is itself a gift. It teaches patience, humility, and the recognition that some stories survive precisely because they refuse resolution. As we study Egypt today, its architecture, its astronomy, its rituals, its myths, we participate in a continuity that stretches across millennia. We read the same stars, touch the same stones, breathe the same desert wind. The story continues in us, in our willingness to listen, to question, to wonder without expecting complete answers. And even now, the ruins respond not with explanations, but with quiet assurance that memory endures in forms we can still feel, if not fully name. When the night settles over the desert, softening every edge until pyramids become gentle silhouettes, you feel the world slow into something ancient and familiar. When the air cools and the sand holds the last warmth of daylight, a quiet unfolds, deep, steady, and patient. You stand there, breathing in the muted scent of limestone and desert wind, and something in the stillness reminds you that time has always moved at its own unhurried pace. Here, in this present moment, the questions that filled earlier hours drift into silence. The stars above you, the same constellations that guided priests, travelers, artisans, and dreamers, shine with calm indifference. They have not changed their positions for thousands of years. They continue their slow arcs, marking seasons, shaping myths, and watching civilizations rise and fade. Even now, Orion lifts itself above the horizon with the same unwavering confidence, as if offering reassurance that continuity persists even when understanding falters. The stones beneath your feet hold their own form of memory. They carry the imprint of ancient chisels, the weight of forgotten footsteps, the warmth of countless dawns. They do not speak, yet their silence feels full, as if they remember everything without ever revealing more than a hint. Some mysteries remain unresolved. Some stories linger where excavation cannot reach. But in this quiet, unresolved truths no longer feel like barriers. They feel like companions, reminders that the world is larger than our explanations. As you breathe, your attention returns gently to your body, to the ground supporting you, to the night around you. The desert wind brushes your skin with a softness that feels both new and ancient. Maybe we do not need every answer. Maybe wonder itself is enough. Maybe the fact that mystery survives after so much time is proof of its purpose. Some things endure because they are meant to invite reflection, not resolution. Above you, stars continue their slow turning. Around you, the desert rests in tranquil quietude. Beneath you, stone waits with patient certainty. These elements, wind, sky, earth, remain unchanged across millennia, carrying the same rhythms that guided people long before your time, and that will guide others long after. And as the night deepens, as the last traces of daylight disappear, the ruins remain in their serene stillness. Wind still moving over ruins, stars still watching, stone still remembering. And somewhere in that quiet, the ancient world continues, not as history, but as presence, not as conclusion, but as gentle, ongoing breath.